Welcome to Conversations with Yogis. My name is Chris, and I'm here with my friend Daniela Semina, who is, among other things, is an author, um, and was part of a yoga teacher training that I did some years ago, and was one of the teacher trainers there, and just does an excellent job there at Peachtree Yoga, and everywhere she teaches, I'm sure. And so, namaste. It's great to have you.
Namaste.
And thanks for being here. And I wanted to start off just talking about what we were just talking about before I hit record about your book. And now I understand you have a DVD related to the same subject. So maybe you could just tell us about the book and then how that led into the DVD project as well.
Hi, Chris. It is such a pleasure to see you again after such a long time. I feel honored and happy that you invited me for this interview. And before getting into how the book relates to the DVD, I would like to share what brought me in first place to write the book. And it comes from a place of personal pain, suffering, setbacks that took me from being a national, international class athlete down to the state where I couldn't move anymore. So moving on a chair was the most I could do. And this is how I actually discovered the path of yoga. I knew a few things about yoga. I read the work of great masters such as Master Iyengar, and thought that yoga could offer me a possibility to heal my neck injury and avoid surgery in the same time. And putting the pieces of the puzzle together, what I knew as a personal trainer, as a fitness professional, what I knew from my background in martial arts with what I was just learning from yoga and about yoga, I started to practice on the floor at first, and the pain was still excruciating, and I couldn't do much except for being on hands and knees or lying on my back, until one day it dawned on me to use a chair. And as soon as I got on the chair and I started to move, the thought that crossed my mind was like, oh my gosh, I must read a book, I must write a book, that will spread this knowledge, this treasure, and reach to people who can't actually practice yoga, although it would greatly benefit them. A few years later, while I was perfecting yoga practices on the chair while working with students who were in desperate need of yoga, yet not being able to get on and off the mat, or who didn't have that space available or the time available to really practice, I developed the first part of the book, which is a little bit of a gentler kind of practice, more like an invitation for people with really, really limited physical abilities to ease their way into it. And then, as the manuscript was growing, I realized that the potential of the chair is basically unlimited. So I ended up bringing together not just very gentle practices and breathing practices where the seated position is very suitable, but also core strengthening and power building elements where, for one thing, the student avoids going all the way down to the floor and then back up, addresses the concern of limited space, such as what do you want to do if you want to exercise and the only time you have available is your lunch break while you're at work? Or what if you have only a 45 minutes time segment before the school bus brings your child at home? So you can make the most out of your time by incorporating, bringing things together and do yoga on the chair. And the idea of the DVD came actually through the feedback, or from the feedback that I got on Amazon from students who are requiring the content of the book in a DVD format. And since I don't like to repeat myself, I created two modules on this DVD, where the first one is called Rise and Shine. And it is really a rise and shine, gradually building in intensity practice. It's very suitable for athletes following intense training or preceding intense training. or for those who are interested in tackling into yoga and they're not quite there yet. It may be temporary injury that prevents kneeling down. Um, and the second module is called Power Up. The name is self-explanatory. And that is a very physically challenging practice that completely breaks the pattern of chair yoga being a super mild, super tame kind of practice where you just sit on the chair and then stretch. That's the full proof to the contrary, that actually you can use the chair to break a sweat and challenge your abdominals and challenge your leg muscles and everything. Both the book and the DVD place a great emphasis on pranayama, breathing techniques to be integrated with asana. It is basics, but because it is basics, it doesn't mean is simplistic. So it has its degree of sophistication and very much depth. And it ends up with guided meditations. Both the book and the DVDs have modules of guided meditation, guided relaxation that I guess nowadays they come in very handy, whether you need to de-stress before a staff meeting, or you're just preparing for a job interview, or you're just trying to put yourself together after a very challenging day, or just to enjoy and reward yourself with few moments of deep restoration. So kind of in a nutshell, this is it about the book and the DVD.
Great. Yeah, I think one of the misconceptions people have about chair yoga is that it's just for old people or it's just for the elderly. But what I hear you saying is that it's used by, people that aren't necessarily even disabled or have, health issues or injuries or anything. Anybody can do chair yoga, especially in the office place. During the day, we were just talking earlier about how we were trying to incorporate it here for teachers and students while they're at their desks. If they don't have enough space in the classroom to, do anything on the floor, do standing postures, they can at least sit there at their desks. And I mean, you can do pranayama and meditation, obviously, in a chair. But there are actually a whole series of postures that can be implemented in a chair as well. And I like the idea of doing some of the core work in a chair, like modified boat in a chair, and some of these other core postures and whatnot, even, just a simple cat-cow flexion extension of the spine, twists, side stretches. All of this can be done in a chair. I mean, you don't have to have a mat and tons of space or anything. So it's pretty interesting. And so the name of the book is Any Chair Yoga. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And the DVD is the same?
Yes, Any Chair Yoga DVD with its 2 modules. I mean, that's a pretty much, it's a very accurate description of its content. Is on the back of the cover of the DVD. So it says very clearly what that is about.
Nice.
Yeah.
And you self-published with CreateSpace.
Yes.
Which was a big inspiration for me, because that's, it's funny because at the time, I was working on this book and I had no idea how to go about publishing it, and everyone had told me about the nightmares of trying to find a publisher and sending in manuscript after manuscript after manuscript and treatment after treatment and having it rejected over and over again. I just didn't want to go through all of that because I knew what I wanted to produce and wasn't necessarily looking for other people's opinions on it, to have it produced. So CreateSpace is actually pretty amazing and easy to use. I found it relatively easy to use. There's a little bit of a learning curve, but not so much. And yeah, I mean, it's essentially, for all intents and purposes, can be free if you do it at the or very economical. There are different packages and options and whatnot, but it's very inexpensive and easy. And then what I like about it is that it's on-demand printing, so you don't have to sit there with stacks of boxes in your garage, you know,
Really,
getting damp and moldy or whatever, because they
there you go.
just print them when people order
Yes.
them on demand, which is wonderful, I think, and very cool. So yeah, maybe you could talk a little bit about. You mentioned that you were like a world class athlete
Hmm.
before, and you know, certainly when when I found out, you know, what how you had been spending a great portion of your life, I it was a surprise to me
Yeah.
because you just come across as um, you know, this very gentle soul, and your yoga asana practice is so graceful, and so it was hard for me to imagine you out there like, you know, kicking butt. So maybe you can talk about you know, your background with martial arts, and then talk about the relationship you see between things like tai chi, qigong, yoga, and the martial arts, and just this movement and the movement of energy through the body, and how this all works together.
It's probably much easier to talk about the similarities than the differences because at a very deep fundamental level, martial arts, whatever martial arts we're talking about, whether karate or qigong or hatha yoga, they have a common foundation. Their common denominator being personal development and reaching for that inner potential and then actualizing that potential. And considering the social historical context that they developed, martial arts turned into the art of the warrior. Karate, for example, translates as the way of an empty hand. So basically, you can achieve everything, all the power that you need is in those empty hands. And every single part of your body can develop into an extremely powerful, lethal weapon if necessary. Um, but all this power can be achieved only and only if you connect with that potential that's within, with that level of energy that we all do have as human beings. But it takes hard work, determination, and dedication to be able to uncover it. It's like mining for diamonds or mining for gold. At first they're in the rough, and then you start processing them and polishing them, and finally the beauty and the value surfaces. When I got initially into karate, I wasn't interested into the aspect of competing, being out there on stage and winning any kind of trophies or anything. What really pulled me into it was this quest for self-discovery and growing stronger in all aspects and building powerful health and creating this balance, this harmony between a super strong physical body and strong and balanced emotionally and psychologically. And it was about that time that I really became aware of the existence of an energetic body. Sorry, I didn't know about the koshas back then. It took me to read your book to really get to the heart of the concept. But 20 something, 30 years ago, it wasn't around. So that was when I started to glimpse of our energetic body and our possibility, our power that extends beyond physical strength. So you have power and you have strength. Um, and it was a beautiful path until things started to change. I'm talking about the political and economical situation in Romania, and this was with the revolution that happened in '89, and many clubs, many centers that where we could initially practice without necessarily having a sponsor. It wasn't that much dependency on funding. So once sponsorship took over, the emphasis shifted from practicing for the sake of practicing more toward practicing for the sake of results and winning competitions. Um, and it was still presented with the option, to practice for the sake of it. But I kind of started to enjoy winning. So at first is the winning for the sake of, oh, I am better than what I used yesterday. Well, what I used to be yesterday, I learned some more, I progressed some more. And then it's very insidiously, a very insidious way towards practicing for the sake of winning tournaments. And the initial goal, that of personal progress, is kind of not getting lost but overshadowed. And you no longer practice to strengthen your body, but many times I found myself practicing through injury. And okay, the body can take it, no pain, no gain, you're bulletproof, you can do this. And then later, when I started to do sparring in Italy, and then later on in Switzerland, and then I ended up here in the United States sparring for my college, for my university, and the pressure kept mounting until I injured during training practice. So my cervical spine injury that nearly left me paralyzed happened during a practice when, in complete disregard of the way I felt, and instead of listening to what would have been wise to do, I've done exactly the opposite. So the ego, the desire to win, the desire to prove myself in a completely unnecessary way took over, and I ended up injured, which, as I'm seeing it now, it was one of the best things that ever happened. Because, I mean, I'm serious about it. It's not that I'm recommending anybody, to break the neck, for the sake of creating a new life.
It was the worst, best thing that ever happened to you.
Yes, it's the worst, best thing. I mean, you put it beautifully. And so it wasn't the martial arts. Martial arts, I have the highest esteem and love for the practice. They can be a beautiful thing. But it is this exacerbation of the ego and exacerbation of the competitiveness, which I've had, that pushed me, past that edge, past that threshold. And when I got into yoga, after healing and realizing that I completely healed, and I started to do things with my body that I couldn't do before in martial arts. I mean, very deep back bends and headstands and you name it, you saw it. So
incredible.
Basically living with no physical limitation, and without the pressure that I have to compete and I have to be able to perform at this level every day. So even the idea of performing gradually faded, and from that relaxed space emerged even more of a physical and mental and emotional state of balance. What I brought with me from martial arts was the sense of discipline, so committing to a rigorous daily or nearly daily practice, physical practice, practicing pranayama. The style of martial arts that initially I practiced was Goju-ryu. And breathing, we had breathing exercises that I recognized right away when I practiced yoga. So much similarity in between the emphasis on breathing and breathing in a certain way. The idea of moving slowly to feel that energy flowing through the body and feel that nourishing and nurturing all muscles and every single cell within. I had that experience while practicing what in karate we call kata or kata's forms. And they're so similar, to what we have in yoga as sun salutations. So there are forms that we practice, and there's the correlation in between movement and breath, and they are the same. Okay, the purpose of katas is, yes, to circulate energy, but also every single movement you're doing there, you're making there, is intended as a block or an attack. So although practice slowly infused with energy, its ultimate purpose is to serve attack or defense. So it's still the fighting aspect. While in yoga, what you are doing there during the sun salutation is just expressing gratitude for the gift of the blessing of sunlight and presence of life giver sun, and connecting with that energy and then circulate it through for your utmost benefit in terms of health and balance overall. So there's no longer no need for competition, no need for fighting anything. You just soften and fight is no longer there. You don't have to fight yourself in first place.
Yeah, it's really all about surrender and
Yes, exactly.
This practice. And something that I really appreciate about the way they teach at Peachtree and the way they teach you to teach at Peachtree, as you know, there's quite an emphasis on not doing the practice while you're teaching up in front of the class. And at first, I was a little resistant to that because I'd already been teaching yoga for about a year when I did the teacher training there, and I, had always modeled most of what was going on in front of the class, and didn't realize it at the time, but subconsciously, when I was modeling something in front of the class, I wanted it to be, the perfect posture or just, flawless, so that and if there was a student doing it better than me, even though maybe not consciously, subconsciously, probably there was something inside me that was like feeling the need to outdo the student or to be, because I was in the role of teacher or what have you, and so this whole notion of not modeling while you're teaching is very conducive to softening the ego within the teacher, certainly. And another excellent reason to practice this way as an instructor is in case you get injured. I mean, you just mentioned working through injury when you were a martial artist. Well, I had the experience. This was when I was teaching a lot of yoga, and at one point I was teaching 14 classes a week.
Wow.
And modeling a lot of it. And so, as you can imagine, 14 classes a week, and I did that for about a year.
Wow.
And then greatly reduced it, and then went back into teaching school and wasn't really teaching much yoga at all. But for about a year I did that, and probably halfway to 3/4 of the way through that year, I really jacked my neck up and my shoulder, and I mean it was rough for a period of about 2 months where I couldn't do anything. I really couldn't do any yoga at all, asana. So basically, I was forced at that point to talk my students through their practice, and so I would put a cushion down in the front of the room, and I would sit there, cross-legged on the floor, because it hurt just to stand up and move around. I wasn't doing any hands-on, nothing. I mean, nothing, no modifications, nothing. I just sat on a cushion in the front of the classroom and taught yoga, just talking my students through their practice, all verbiage. And thank goodness, Peachtree had instilled that in me. Otherwise, who knows? I could have just said, well, I'm just not going to teach yoga for 2 months or whatever. But it is really more important than I realized at the time. This whole notion of being able to guide students through a practice with just verbiage. And you want to talk a little bit about that and why you think Peachtree has that sort of philosophy?
Mind reader. It was on my mind in a number of ways as you're talking about it. This teaching through example or doing the class alongside your students. Going back to martial arts, I trained with teachers excellent in what they're doing, both teaching and in terms of performance. And some of them used to teach the class and practice alongside the students. Most, I'm like 80% of what we're doing. And I had teachers that would demonstrate whatever needed to be demonstrated. but mostly pace the room and verbally guide the students. And I was wondering which way felt the best. I got very much used to the people who would practice along the class, the students. And when I started to teach yoga, I was also teaching for a couple of years before entering teacher training at Peachtree. And my first impulse was to do the practice along with the class. And then I realized that if I'm doing that, there are so many blind spots and I'm not really seeing what's going on. And if I'm practicing and then I have to stop and walk, assuming that I'm seeing what's going on still, and I go to adjust the person and then come back, once I'm breaking the flow within my own practice, chances are, as I'm entering the pose where I left it, I might get injured myself. Because I remember Graham made this example when I was in teacher training many years ago, so at Peachtree Yoga Center. It was about forward bend and back bend, but I think that this example applies to everything, getting into a pose right away and getting out of the pose right away, skipping the intermediary steps. The example was that of a paper clip, you know, that you stretched and then you straighten it and then you start bending and, you know, both ways up and down until it hits and it breaks. So I think that coming out of the pose and briskly getting back into it and coming back to adjust someone else in the room and going back into the pose to pick up your practice from where you left it can be dangerous. And I know of some teachers, friends of mine, who injured exactly this way. I think the teachers at Peachtree Yoga, they're greatly experienced and knowledgeable, and they've kind of seen it all throughout their lives and maybe some more. So their place of teaching is one of wisdom, common sense, and a whole lot of experience. When I got there to training, to complete my 200 hours training, I was debating. I was at the point where I was debating with myself which is the best way to teach. And after completing my 200 hours training, I realized that the best way to teach is that of being so articulate and so clear in your guidance that people can really follow what you're saying, like closing their eyes and visualizing and feeling with their own body what you ask them to do. And maybe at times when you have brand new beginners and especially people who are not very coordinated overall, maybe you can briefly demonstrate something, but this shouldn't turn into doing the practice along with them. And then while I watched great names within the field of yoga teaching, and watching Brian Kest and Baron Baptiste and Shiva Ray and a number of others, they don't do the practice with their students. So I'm watching Master Iyengar conducting a class. He doesn't do the practice, and he doesn't lack the physical ability to do so. And he can supersede in technical ability and flexibility most of his students, yet he's not doing this. So it's not of a matter of putting out your ego there, which I found hard coming from the karate background and national, international levels of competition and being on stage. And it's like, ego is a great thing to use as a driving force, but not as a substitute for your soul, for who you are. You achieve things and you accomplish things and you write books. It comes from that ego, your desire to share your experience and what's valuable about it, you know, with others. But it doesn't mean it takes over to the point where you turn into a show-off. So that's not the purpose.
No, definitely. And something else that I really liked about that particular training is how much meditation was incorporated into the training. And of course, as you know, I mean, yoga, the word yoga was synonymous with the word samadhi, at least in the classical sense. When Patanjali wrote the Yoga Sutras, they meant the same thing. And so an asana, of course, in the sutras is given little mention, and so classically yoga was more associated with seated meditation. And so I really appreciated the fact that that was given credence and given some authority, really, in that training. And so, how much meditation do you incorporate in just a normal class? And when I say meditation, there's maybe something you do at the very beginning, at the very end, actual seated meditation, but then there's also this element of presence and being fully present as you move. And so how important is that in your personal classes that you teach?
That is very important. I mean, I would say that is it. So that is the essence. Meditation. We start, the class with the regular centering with the intention of drawing the awareness inward and screening the distractions the best we can, not blocking anything abruptly. That would be really hard, don't think of a pink elephant. So you don't just order yourself, okay, now you're here for yoga, and you stop thinking of your to-do list, because what you'll get in your mind will be exactly that to-do list. So by gently drawing the awareness inward and using maybe most of the times breath or some gentle, not very intrusive visualization, we draw the awareness inward, and I would relate this more to a dharana, toward a focusing kind of practice. So you focus on something to screen out everything else. When we move into the physical practice, that state of awareness that's been developed with centering, that carries over. And it's my role, the role of the teacher, the instructor, to help people to create the right premises for that awareness to carry over and manifest itself with every single pose, with every single transition, because the definition, as Yoga Sutra puts it, the steadiness of the mind and the relaxation of the effort is the perfection of the asana. So if the effort is excessive, where breath is being blocked and teeth are being grinded, and there's straining, and all what you can perceive is your eyes popping out, that is not the relaxation of the effort. That you're erring into too much into too much intensity. If your asana doesn't feel like literally anything in your body, and you still have the to-do list running to your mind, and you don't feel that awareness and that connection to the body while you're practicing, most likely you're not challenging, you're not getting into the just enough. And that would be erring on the side of too little intensity. So awareness is the key ingredient that lets us know whether we're pushing too strong, whether we're not doing enough, and finding that place where you engage the body just enough, feeling something, but not getting into any kind of painful edges. Being able to mentally relax as you physically engage and keep that breath flowing, whether you just do regular breathing or any kind of pranayama technique. I think this is a pretty good description of a physical practice, the physical and mental component, how it manifests. So that state of continuous awareness, that meditation in motion, as it's still.
I lost you.
Okay.
Sorry,
No,
I lost you for a second.
Okay, I'm back. So it is so toward the end of the practice, when we finally get into shavasana, then probably we shift, spontaneously we shift more from the dharana, from the focusing, into the dhyana, where that's this image Yoga Sutras put is beautifully, where the awareness flows like the oil from a lamp, and it merges the seer and the seen. They're merging. So it's just getting goosebumps as I'm telling you this. So it is just the experience of that beautiful, beautiful state of nothingness and nowhereness. And there is the practice, and that has depth to it. And of course, there is a self-standing meditation practice that most of us yoga teachers, we do have and we do enjoy, or I hope most of the yoga teachers do have and do enjoy.
You'd be
Um,
surprised.
okay, I don't want to be surprised right now. Let me dream about it, okay?
Yeah, that's cool.
So where the dynamic is no longer on asana and pranayama, and supposedly we're so conversant with it that we can sit down, do some pranayama, maybe do some light asana before, and where we just sit down and using a mantra or other techniques, the mind comes to silence, and we get to experience what Yoga Sutra defines as our own essential nature. That very silent place, yet keenly aware of very fine processes going on within. So grounding into very subtle realms of our own existence, personal and cosmic in the same time. So it's that experience. And that carries over. I mean, you have, yes, I know, you have something, in that moment, but that carries over. It's not very obvious in the beginning, but all of a sudden you find more of that as you're doing homework with your child. I mean, all of a sudden with my child, at least that's always the case. I don't feel the need to snap at him. I don't feel the need to explode when he's reluctant to do what I'm doing. So something of that settled state carries into the day. And this is something that our trainers, our teachers in teacher training were so clear about. I remember our course leader making this example, practicing meditation at first is like, carving a line in stone. So to carve the line would be the stress, the unhappy event that takes a toll on you, and the line is carved there for forever. And then as you practice, it's like drawing a line in the mud. So it's there, but it vanishes. And then it's like drawing a line in the water. As soon as you drew it, it's no longer there. And then it's like drawing a line in the water. Why even bother drawing a line? So, and it takes a while. It takes a while, yeah.
Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, that's the whole trick, isn't it? Yeah, I find it very easy. And I think a lot of people that meditate for long enough find it quite easy to cultivate a certain state of consciousness during a seated meditation, but then, the phone rings, or, you hear horns honking outside, or possibly you have an altercation with someone, or an unpleasant interaction, or whatever the case may be, or you hit your you hit your toe on the chair leg, or whatever it is, and it's over. I mean, you're out of it, and you're back inside Chris or Daniela or whatever personality you happen to be manifesting through. And so the trick really is to maintain that state throughout the day. But it is tricky, especially for some people more than others, if they have a very stressful job, if they have to commute through an hour of city traffic to get to work. So what advice do you give to your yoga students, as far as how to maintain, because everybody, that's what I love about a yoga class, is that you get, however many people coming into your class that are completely different vibrationally when they enter the room. And then by the end of class, the frequency has become so harmonious that everyone really is vibrating at the same frequency by the end of Shavasana, and they sit up and they're clear and they're clean. But then again, but of course, then they return back out into the world, and they get more dirt kicked on them again. So, I mean, what advice do you give to your yoga students to maintain that level of clean, clear, calm awareness, into their day and out into the world?
There are quite a few things that I personally do and I found helpful. First of all, we have to live a certain lifestyle that is very supportive toward the practice. And then once that practice becomes very, very strongly established, it feeds back our life. So in first place, my thing was to cut down on stimulants like coffee and chocolates. That was my thing. I mean, I was never into any kind of alcohol, so that wasn't an issue. Kind of revisit my dietary guidelines and cut down on anything that stresses in any shape or form the nervous system. Because the nervous system regulates the activity of the endocrine system, and then the endocrine system takes care of everything. And our moods, our reactiveness or non-reactiveness depends on releases of adrenaline, of our capacity to produce serotonin, and maintain that under the circumstances. So there's a lot involved, and whatever we put in our mouth impacts the way we feel and the way we react. So that was one thing. And the other thing is consistency of the practice. When under stress, especially when you feel pressure and you feel that you don't have time for anything, that is the moment when you need to pick up on physical practice. It is very hard to sit down and meditate when you are in prey of anxiety, when you have your heartbeat at 200. Sitting down and meditate is like trying to suppress, to artificially block something that really wants to come out. So just forcing yourself into meditation will just pique your frustration. You're not going to be able to turn the switch off and just focus on the breath while you still have things lingering in your system. So a good asana practice like, 10, 20 sun salutations, which don't take a long time and you go by breath. And what that would do is going to wear off your level of adrenaline and cortisol. Adrenaline and cortisol, they are there for us to use in case of emergencies, like an emergency response. And once you wear off the levels, your degree of anxiety is going to diminish back to a much calmer state where you can finally sit down, do some pranayama, and then start meditation where if all what you have is 5 minutes, better than nothing. Ideally, 10, 15, people meditate 20 minutes, whatever your teacher advised. But definitely make time for that. If the experience is not perfect, it doesn't really matter. Don't care about it, because what's really important is the process. Things happen even if we don't acknowledge they are happening. Even if we don't acknowledge they are happening anyway. And what happens is there is a very subtle level of resetting. It's like rebooting a computer. So you reboot, and there are changes. There are so many studies endorsing meditation as good for a number of conditions and major factor of de-stressing the nervous system. So you do your meditation practice, and maybe when you encounter the difficult situation throughout the day, of course, the first impulse may be to snap or to react. If you're able to just hold on briefly and remind yourself, okay, 2 hours ago, 3 hours ago, I was in that state, in that calmness, in that peacefulness. It's still me. I was in complete control of my state of mind, of my emotion, what I was doing then. Why can't I be now in control of it? What has changed? I haven't changed. And stress is not what hits us. Stress is the way we respond to what hits us. So most of the times it is a choice, and the more you practice the choosing instead of allowing you to be dragged by the current, the more you establish you become in this practice of not reacting impulsively to whatever happens. Rather stop, evaluate, and see, is it worth it? Say anything about it? Do I really have to say something that would make a valid point and contribute to the conversation? Or is it just a waste of my time and resources? What am I getting from becoming all of a sudden very angry and have those adrenaline levels hiking up after I worked hard, 20 sun salutations, to bring them down? And it's very hard in the beginning. I mean, my case, all these nice things would come to me after having snapped, after having the arguments, like, John, I should have remembered. I mean, I'm preaching this to myself every single day, yet I'm forgetting it when it happens. It is normal, but with sustained practice, it starts carrying over. It starts carrying over. It's like when we learn any kind of skill in any kind of sport or yoga asana. It's shaky in the beginning. It doesn't look great. It doesn't feel right. Remember pranayama. How right does it feel, pranayama, when you start pranayama? It's like the weirdest thing ever. And then all of a sudden you find yourself doing some pranayama without even intending it. So it becomes second nature. And it's the same with reactiveness and the effect of meditation carrying over into everyday activities. So keep practicing. Practice is the key of success. So that's pretty much it. Yeah.
So much wisdom. Beautiful. Well said. Yeah, and I think we'll probably that seems like a pretty good stopping point. And the idea with these conversations with yogis is I just had this idea that whenever I would watch these interviews with people or talk shows interviewing, yogis or meditation teachers or spiritual teachers, they always came to an end, and I always wondered, well, why didn't they ask this? Or, they didn't really get into that. They didn't touch on that subject. And the reason is because they only interviewed the person one time. And so I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool to have a running dialogue or a running conversation with the same few people, over and over? That way you can pick up right where you left off and continue the dialogue and go deeper and deeper and deeper to more subtle levels of conversation, of reality, of metaphysical and esoteric thought. Absolutely. And so I think that you and I have probably just scratched the surface here. Oh, and yeah. Even though we did get pretty deep, but so the idea is that we keep this like running dialogue happening with just a few people. And it was interesting because the first few I did, I contacted some friends and some people that I really respect, and I noticed like the first 5 or so of these I did were all males, and I was like, what's happening here? And so thank you for responding to my email and for agreeing to do this and bringing some feminine energy into these conversations with yogis. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your insight, and I so look forward to our next one.
Absolutely, I'm looking forward to it too. Thank you so much for having me on this interview.
Yeah, and by the way, buy her book, Any Chair Yoga, or DVD, Any Chair Yoga. Do you have a website right now for that?
Yes, absolutely. So if you go on Simina Yoga, SIMINA Yoga, SiminaYoga.com. That's our website.
Perfect.
And your subscriptions and stories and articles and question and answers, and leave your feedback, and I love writing back to your comments and questions and making more friends. It's always lovely.
It is lovely. Well, beautiful. Say hi to everybody at Peachtree for us, and let's talk again very soon.
Bye, Chris. Bye.
Ciao.
Ciao. While working with students who are in desperate need of yoga, yet not being able to get on and off the mat, or who didn't have that space available or the time available to really practice, I developed the first part of the book, which is a little bit of a gentler kind of practice, more like an invitation for people with really, really limited physical abilities to ease their way into it. And then as the manuscript was growing, I realized that the potential of the chair is basically unlimited. So I ended up bringing together not just very gentle practices and breathing practices where the seated position is very suitable, but also core strengthening and power building elements where, for one thing, the student avoids going all the way down to the floor and then back up, addresses the concern of limited space, such as what do you want to do if you want to exercise and the only time you have available is your lunch break while you're at work? Or what if you have only 45 minutes time segment before the school bus brings your child at home? So you can make the most out of your time by incorporating, bringing things together and do yoga on the chair. And the idea of the DVD came actually, it is basics, but because it is basics, it doesn't mean is simplistic. So it has its degree of sophistication and of very much depth. And it ends up with guided meditations. Both the book and the DVDs have modules of guided meditation, guided relaxation that I guess nowadays they come in very handy, whether you need to de-stress before a staff meeting, or you're just preparing for a job interview, or you're just trying to put yourself together after a very challenging day, or just to enjoy and reward yourself with few moments of deep restoration. So kind of in a nutshell, this is it about the book and the DVD.
Great. Yeah, I think one of the misconceptions people have about chair yoga is that it's just for old people or it's just for the elderly. But what I hear you saying is that it's used by, people that aren't necessarily even disabled or have, health issues or injuries or anything. Anybody can do chair yoga, especially in the office place. During the day, we were just talking earlier about how we were trying to...
Through the feedback, or from the feedback that I got on Amazon from students who are requiring the content of the book in a DVD format. And since I don't like to repeat myself, I created two modules on this DVD, where the first one is called Rise and Shine. And it is really a rise and shine, gradually building in intensity practice. It's very suitable for athletes following intense training or preceding intense training, or for those who are interested in tackling into yoga and they're not quite there yet. It may be temporary injury that prevents kneeling down. And the second module is called Power Up. The name is self-explanatory. And that is a very physically challenging practice that completely breaks the pattern of chair yoga being a super mild, super tame kind of practice where you just sit on the chair and then stretch. That's the full proof to the contrary, that actually you can use the chair to break a sweat and challenge your abdominals and challenge your leg muscles and everything. Both the book and the DVD place a great emphasis on pranayama, breathing techniques, to be integrated with asana.
Welcome to Conversations with Yogis. My name is Chris, and I'm here with my friend Daniela Semina, who is, among other things, is an author, and was part of a yoga teacher training that I did some years ago, and was one of the teacher trainers there, and just does an excellent job there at Peachtree Yoga and everywhere she teaches, I'm sure. And so, namaste. It's great to have you.
Namaste.
And thanks for being here. And I wanted to start off just talking about what we were just talking about before I hit record, about your book. And now I understand you have a DVD related to the same subject. So maybe you could just tell us about the book and then how that led into the DVD project as well.
Hi, Chris. It is such a pleasure to see you again after such a long time. I feel honored and happy that you invited me for this interview. And before getting into how the book relates to the DVD, I would like to share what brought me in first place to write the book. And it comes from a place of personal pain, suffering, setbacks that took me from being a national, international class athlete down to the state where I couldn't move anymore. So moving on a chair was the most I could do. And this is how I actually discovered the path of yoga. I knew a few things about yoga. I read the work of great masters such as Master Iyengar, and thought that yoga could offer me a possibility to heal my neck injury and avoid surgery in the same time. And putting the pieces of the puzzle together, what I knew as a personal trainer, as a fitness professional, what I knew from my background in martial arts with what I was just learning from yoga and about yoga, I started to practice on the floor at first, and the pain was still excruciating, and I couldn't do much except for being on hands and knees or lying on my back, until one day it dawned on me to use a chair. And as soon as I got on the chair and I started to move, the thought that crossed my mind was like, oh my gosh, I must read a book, I must write a book, that will spread this knowledge, this treasure, and reach to people who can't actually practice yoga, although it would greatly benefit them. A few years later, while I was perfecting yoga practices on the chair,